U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has seen a lot of ports, but until today had never seen one with the existential challenges of the Port of Alaska. The Anchorage port is embarking on a massive modernization project expected to cost $1.6 billion. And as Alaska Public Media's Liz Ruskin reports, locals hope much of that price tag will be funded by the federal agency Buttigieg leads.
Port External Affairs Director Jim Jager played tour guide, pointing out the construction underway and what's ahead in future phases.
So what we're doing right now, you see basically all the land on the water side of the tote vessel, the blue vessel.
Yeah.
That's what's going to be pulled out and removed.
That little peninsula.
So that peninsula basically is going to go
Buttigieg heard about the corrosion destroying the steel pilings of the old dock. He learned that glacial silt and a massive tidal swing act together as a power sander, working away at any pilings installed to hold up a new dock. The secretary sought reassurance that the new engineering is solid.
So the technique is completely different than the one that generated the pilings that are now corroding and being replaced, or do you also replace those?
It's still a wharf-on pile.
Jager explained about the new steel thickness and anti-corrosion technology. The dock, Jager says, is taller than the Statue of Liberty.
You go from the bottom of the piles to the top of the cranes. Just to give you, why is this such an expensive project? It's actually huge. You just can't see a lot of it.
The secretary made no major announcements on his port tour. For the local officials who followed Buttigieg around the docks, it was more about what he heard than what he said. Anchorage Assemblywoman Meg Zaletel wanted Buttigieg to see why such a relatively small port, compared to those in the rest of the country, costs so much.
So the importance of the secretary's visit is really to show him that the port is not only what it appears on paper. This port has so many unique features, and it plays such an important role to the state that it's always hard to convey that until you get out here and you get to see it, talk about the unique circumstances.
There was little discussion on the tour about what happened to the last big plan for the Anchorage port. 2 decades ago, the federal government sunk hundreds of millions of dollars into a port expansion. It was plagued by design problems and was ultimately scrapped. Buttigieg says that failed project won't be held against the current one.
We really want to be focused more on the future than on the past. And what we recognize is that there is a need today, and there are resources today.
Buttigieg repeatedly gave credit to President Biden's infrastructure law for providing those resources, and noted that both of Alaska's U.S. senators were among the Republicans who crossed the aisle to vote for the law. It's slated to send $2.6 billion to Alaska. Reporting from Anchorage, I'm Liz Ruskin.
Secretary Buttigieg kicked off his 3-day tour of Alaska yesterday, beginning in the northwest Arctic community of Kotzebue. It was his first time visiting the 49th state.
It's my first time above the Arctic Circle on U.S. soil, and other than a brief meeting that we had this morning at Anchorage Airport, this is really the launch of the trip and my first impression of this state.
Buttigieg was joined in Kotzebue by Senator Dan Sullivan to meet with statewide aviation leaders and to address challenges in rural Alaska, from airport infrastructure to air freight. Supply chain issues for rural communities were also a focus. Buttigieg spent a portion of the afternoon touring the Cape Blossom Road, a decades-long project to connect Kotzebue with the planned Deepwater port. In a van ride along the road, Buttigieg said talking to community leaders was critical to understanding how higher costs factor into federal spending on rural infrastructure.
Part of why I'm here is it's a very big priority for me, for our department, and for President Biden to make sure that when we're working on infrastructure that it works for everybody. And the answers that make sense in New York City or South Bend, Indiana, where I grew up, are different than what works in a place like this region, or for that matter, a place like Anchorage.
The Cape Blossom Road recently completed Phase 1, a little less than half of the 11-mile project. The road is supported by local and state funds, as well as a $5 million federal investment. Because it's constructed on permafrost, it has to be insulated to keep the ground cool. Meanwhile, the region's climate continues to warm. Buttigieg said the road was just one example of the Arctic's unique infrastructure challenges.
to see how much goes into creating a mile of road here, to see the vision that the community has for how to expand access to Deepwater Port, to understand what the barging process does to the cost of living and the cost of construction. All of that's been extremely informative, and that's exactly why we came.
Buttigieg returned to Kotzebue to welcome the community at a potluck and meet and greet event before touring Kotzebue's airport to meet with Federal Aviation Administration employees. After the Anchorage visit, the Transportation Secretary is scheduled to travel to the southeast communities of Haines, Skagway, and Juneau tomorrow. Senator Lisa Murkowski will join Buttigieg for that leg of the trip. The two are scheduled to tour an Alaska Marine Highway System terminal and ferry during the Skagway stop.